So with user-reducer out of the way, let's dive into a different problem you might face in bigger React applications specifically, but even in this tiny demo here, we already have it, that can be solved in a more elegant way. I'm talking about a problem, in quotes, where you are passing a lot of data through a lot of components via props. And a good example here is our isLoggedIn state and the login functions. We're managing this state in the app component because I lifted this state up to that component because we basically need this state, this isLoggedIn state, and the functions to change it everywhere in this application. We use the logged in state in the header, to which I'm passing it through the isAuthenticated prop. From there, we are able to log out. So I pass the pointer at the logout handler to my header on the onLogout prop. And we also need the login state to render different content here, either the login or the home component. And to those components, I also pass the logout handler or the login handler. Now, the logout handler being passed to the home component, that's something I'm doing here so that we theoretically could add a button there with our button component, for example, to allow the user to log out there as well. Not something we need in this app, but something you could add here with props on logout, since we're getting a pointer to this handler anyways. And if you do that once you log in here, you also have the logout button here. So long story short, we use this login state in a lot of different places in the app. Now, obviously, this is a very, very, very simple app, a very simple demo. And here, passing our state around like this is not a huge problem. Now, it is quite common that you pass data to components through props, but it's always a problem if you forward state through multiple components. So if you basically just leverage props to forward data to another component. And that's actually something we're doing in the main header. Here in the app component, I'm passing isLoggedIn through the isAuthenticated prop to main header. And I'm passing the logout handler through the onLogout prop to the main header as well. Now in the main header though, I'm using neither of those two props. I'm using them only to forward them again to the navigation component. Because it's the navigation component in the end which needs the isLoggedIn data to render different links, and which needs the onLogout prop and the logout handler therefore to do something when the logout button is clicked. So essentially what I'm doing here is in the main header, I'm receiving props, I'm receiving data through props, which I'm not actually using primarily in the main header. Instead, I just forward that data. That's not necessarily a problem, but in bigger apps, that chain of forwarding might become longer and longer. Consider this example of a fictional app. We could have an app with an app component, with, let's say, an off section with a login form, with a shop section where we have a list of products in which we render individual product items, and with a cart. Now, in the login form, we might have the login event when the user fills out the form and submits the form, and we validate the data and find out that the user is logged in. And we might need that login data, so that login status, the information that the user is logged in different parts of the app. We might need it in the shop, we might need it in the cart, to show the cart, to avoid that the user can go there if he or she is not logged in. It's easy to imagine that we need information about the login status in different parts of the app. And we have something similar. Let's say the user adds a product to the cart. We need that information in the cart component to show the product there, for example. But since the product is a direct child of products, which is a child of shop, which is a child of app, and since the login event happens in the login form, which is a child of auth, which is a child of app, we don't have those direct connections to the other components where the data might be needed. If a user clicks a button in the product component to add a product to the cart, the information needs to reach the cart component, but there is no direct connection between the product component and the cart component. And the same for the login. And therefore, what we typically would do is we would use props to pass a function handler to the login form, for example, so that in there we can call it. But that essentially means that we're forwarding data through our different components. And the same, of course, if we add something to the cart. Now that means that this function that should be triggered when the user adds something to the cart would probably be managed in the app component, because we lifted the state up to the level where we have access to both the product component indirectly and the cart component. And that's only the case in the app component. Only this component has at least indirect connections to both components, product and cart. And therefore, we would forward a pointer to the add to cart function through all those other components, the shop component and the products component, even though those components probably don't need that function. They only need it so that they can forward it to the product component in the end. So in the end here, we have the same problem I described here, just on a larger scale. Here it's a very simple app, but even here we are forwarding data through the main header to the navigation component on props we receive in the main header, even though we don't really need the data there. So therefore, in bigger apps, you could easily build such prop chains, which are used to forward data through components to other components. That's something you can do, and that's not necessarily bad, but the bigger your app gets, the more inconvenient it is to do that. Instead, it would be nicer if we could use props in a component to only receive the data this component really needs from its parent, and not to forward other data through the parent, which the parent does neither manage nor need itself. And for that, we got a component-wide, behind-the-scenes state storage built into React. We have a concept called React Context, and this in the end allows us to, for example, trigger an action in that component-wide state storage, and then directly pass that to the component that is interested without building such a long prop chain. And that allows us to solve our problem in a more elegant way here. So let's take a closer look at this now.